state for new farmers for their capital equipment. So what that means is they can actually use state grant money that we've gotten for them and use that as a down payment on a tractor. So instead of maybe a $50,000 for a new tractor, they can take $10,000 from a state grant and use that as a down payment. Then we work with financial institutions like Fourm Credit East to allow them to then finance the rest of it. So therefore you have all in one shot, farmers able to get out in the field, whether it's the tractor or it's irrigation equipment or whatever combination. So we worked with the Peconic Land Trust, which is now implementing this. We've now helped dozens of farmers be able to afford to become farmers. And we need to make sure, we need to take that program that I initiated along with Larry Cantwell and Al Krupski and take that nationwide. If we had federal funding for that, because the issue of an aging farm population is not just here on Long Island, it is around the country. And what it would be so much more powerful if we had federal money behind it and not just state money.
Yeah.
And we looked at not only access to credit, but we looked at access to land and access to affordable farming land. As we know, our land values are exceedingly high in the town of Southampton and in the region as a whole. So I worked with John Halsey at the Peconic Land Trust, and we created a program where we have now added an additional level of easements and covenants on active farmland, which first of all requires that this land, to qualify for these easements, will remain by law in active food cropping in perpetuity, which means that it has no other value to anything but to farming. And by that, we strip the value off of it to the point where the per acre price is approximately $25,000 and makes it then affordable for young farmers to tap into that, to buy land, to avoid their taxes on that land, and to stay farming and to come farming. And then we worked with the environment, with the real estate community to help us bring properties to us that would be interested in tapping into this program, and with some great success. And we have now seen a handful of young farming families who have been able to either add to their farmland with affordability and have been able to add that level of easements on their existing land already, and with the funds that were freed up from that to buy additional land, as well as attract young farmers that were just getting into farming.
How do you take that idea to the federal level?
Well, it's something that, as I said, I've been endorsed by Senator Gillibrand, who is a great champion of agriculture. I actually met her the first time when she was running for Senate, and she was here with the Long Island Farm Bureau. And we talked about these sorts of programs and how they get translated into federal programs and where funding gets appropriated to this to make sure that programs like this start to mushroom. She has endorsed me for that reason, because she knows I'm a friend of agriculture. She knows I have innovative ideas for how to make sure that farming stays sustainable and stays in our communities. And I want to add something to that, which goes back to the environmental issue. And when we're talking about the pressure to fertilize, etc., and what the cycle then of that going back into our groundwaters. One of the things that the Clean Water Technology Center is looking at, as you extract the nitrogen as it's going into our groundwater, and you stop that, and you pull that out, is the creation of a secondary product, which would be a sustainable fertilizer, which then could be made available to farmers at a extremely reduced cost, but also would not create the chemical pollution that is going into. So those sorts of programs and solutions.
We are not taking questions from the audience. However, it just so happens that the next question on my list that was provided by my colleagues is on campaign finance reform. And it is that it remains a significant issue in United States politics. With a 2-year term, and I guess the question will go to you first, Mr. Cohen, how much time do you think a congressional candidate should devote to raising campaign funds while in office? I saw a story the other day about just how much time you have to spend as a freshman legislator raising funds. What kind of limits or expansions in campaign finance would you like to see?
Sure, great question, and it's fundamental, because honestly, campaign for finance reform is fundamental to promoting progressive values across the board. Right now, oil and gas companies, which I've fought against and helped prosecute, can put as much money as they want into campaigns thanks to Citizens United. Right now, insurance companies can tilt the system in their favor. Big business has been distorting our government and distorting our policies because of our campaign finance laws. I fully support a public financing option. I've been a leader in that fight for years. I actually wrote my law school thesis from Harvard Law School on campaign finance reform. That was 20 years ago. It was bad then, it's even worse now. 2 years ago, I was named by the Long Island Progressive Coalition as their Person of the Year for my fight for campaign finance reform here in New York State. I helped organize a group through the Brennan Center of Justice that fought for campaign finance reform here in New York State, where it is actually more lax than virtually anywhere else in the country. It is crazy how much time is spent raising money. We have to spend a lot of money to get our message out in these elections, and there's a lot of outside money from these corporate interests that can come in. I don't have the backing of folks on Wall Street. I haven't had, unlike Anna, Wall Street executives throw me fundraisers. I haven't had Hamptons developers throw me fundraisers. So I am reaching out to folks in my community, the startup community, in the Long Island environmental community, and others to help me fund the campaign. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. And I think what was interesting about both the 60 Minutes piece, and if anyone saw the John Oliver piece that he did on HBO about a few weeks ago, is that members of Congress know it too. That they would much rather, and I would much rather, and I'm sure Anna would much rather, spend as much time as possible talking to people about issues. Instead, too much time is spent on fundraising, and that's true in Congress as well. So what I would do is, one, move towards public financing of our elections. That's critically important. Two, we need to overturn Citizens United. That involves electing a Democratic president, getting new Supreme Court justices. And by the way, how about confirming the Supreme Court justice who has already been nominated?
That's really cheap. It's a Democratic crowd.
Well, we should do it. They should do it. The Republican Senate should stand up and do it. And you haven't heard from Lee Zeldin on that, have you? No. But, so public financing, obviously Citizens United, but the problem existed before Citizens United. And that's why we need to move to public financing. We also need to make sure that other states have done, which is eliminate the ability of people to fundraise during the session. So for instance, you can't, in New York State, you can have a fundraiser, you can vote on the floor of the state senate, whatever, and then go up a fundraiser that evening. Most other states don't allow that. I don't think we should allow that in the federal government either.
This is one area where we absolutely agree. We need a public funding system in this country. Our democracy is fundamentally threatened by the way our campaigns and our representatives need to seek money to run their campaigns. But let's harken it back to us. I'm proud to have over 4,000 individual supporters with an average contribution of less than $100 supporting my campaign. And I have on my own outraised my opponent. And for a hedge fund Wall Streeter, where I have to say your rhetoric just doesn't match your actions.
First of all, I'm not a hedge fund person or a Wall Street person, so I don't know where that comes from.
Well, you do run a hedge fund.
No, I do not.
Okay, venture capital, hedge
Okay,
fund.
venture capital is for small businesses.
You're investing in oil companies, etc. So, and where money's in Cayman Islands, etc. Listen, I can back that up. But let's talk about it. I think if you look into the records there, you will see that. But, let me finish.
That's a pretty serious charge. I'll give him a chance to respond.
Yeah, I mean, venture capital, folks, is about starting small companies. The companies I'm involved with are baby companies. Like, the company that I founded was recently named Inc. Magazine's list of the fastest growing companies in the country. A company I started 6 years ago. It's up to 50 employees. That's the biggest one we have. So these are small companies. I haven't worked on Wall Street. The only time I ever worked even near Wall Street was when I was a state prosecutor prosecuting corporations that were ripping off people. So. Early stage company, but that's a real, that's
Okay, but
completely
venture
different.
capital, where you have invested in oil companies, where you have invested in Cayman Islands. This is factual, ladies and gentlemen, this is factual. I know he doesn't talk about it, but I'll challenge you to find I'll show you the facts. And where you have put $250,000 money in there. And that is,
This is deteriorating very quickly
no,
here.
this is reality, and these are the things that don't get talked about. And I think when we're talking
Let me
about,
suggest this. I think those are serious charges, and I think you should back them up
I
in
absolutely
some
will.
capacity.
I
But
absolutely.
let's move on to some other issues. You were going to make a larger point here, I think. What was the point you were?
I was going to make the point that, yes, money has to be taken out of politics, there's no question about it. And I think the self-financing part of it has to be taken out of it too. And when individuals are able to put $250,000 of their own dollars into, or more, into a race, then you are perverting democracy right there.
Okay. And if,
Well, look, I put the vast majority of my personal savings in because I believe that I don't have the backing of cannabis developers, I don't have the backing of people on Wall Street, and I believe I'm the best person to legally Zeldin, and so I have invested the money that I have in this race. That's a personal issue, you know, and a personal decision to make. But in my mind, beating Lee Zeldin is important enough to invest in this race, and that's why I've done it.
And I love the fact that you make the kind of money where you can invest $250,000. But it's true. And if those are the people that can run for office, we need a public financing law, is what we need.
okay, that's in bounds. All right. Let me ask you another question. This comes from my colleagues. What do you think the biggest opportunity for job creation on the East End is? You can start.
Thank you. I think we have to recognize that small business is our district's economy. There is no question about that. And small businesses, everything from the mom and pop stores to the service businesses to healthcare support businesses, to agriculturally related businesses, to second homeowner and tourism businesses. That is at the backbone of our community and our economy here. And supporting things like affordable housing so that people who work those businesses can actually afford to live here. We got the single largest, only real affordable housing project done in my time as town supervisor. We had the president of our hospital come out and tell us how badly we needed this. And we need more of it. We need to support affordable housing. We need to make sure that there's access to credit for our small businesses. We need to make sure that public transportation works out here so that small businesses can get their employees to and from. We need comprehensive immigration reform so that the people that are working in the shadows here and the businesses that are having to hire people that are working in the shadows are alleviated from that pressure. We need to make sure that the H-1B visas that make it so that agricultural workers that come on a temporary basis to support our agricultural industry is put back in place again. And we need to make sure that the federal dollars that support these businesses here and bring incentive programs, tax abatement programs, and again, working with both federal, state, and county governments to do that. Look at the industrial park that we have in West Hampton, the Reckler Park there, and the difficulty that those businesses are having, both being able to move here, stay here, and not get moved out of town. They just lost one of their biggest small businesses out of there. Why? Because they could not find staff that was trained. They could not find staff that could afford to live out here. And we have to make that training and that ability to afford to live here, both from an affordable real estate perspective, but also taxation perspective. And that is going to require several levels of government working together.
Mr. Colon,
Sure. Thanks.
where we can create jobs.
Sure. One of the reasons I'm the best person to go and beat Lee Zeldin is because I've actually created jobs, and I've worked to create those jobs here on Long Island and across the country. When I worked with research institutions here, we have incredible research institutions, Brookhaven National Labs, Stony Brook University, Cold Spring Harbor. realized that we were doing great research, but we weren't doing a very good job of creating companies and jobs out of that research. So I put together a public-private partnership about 2+ years ago that has now launched 10 baby companies coming out of our research institutions here on Long Island. Now, not all of them are going to work, because that's the nature of what I do. We get early stage companies going, and some of them work and some of them don't. But without having small companies, we never have the bigger companies that are the bigger employers of the future. So we need to make sure that we're creating more small businesses here. And as someone who's actually done that, I have the ability to help lead our region forward on that. We need to use our research institution and research assets better, using the model that I've worked on. We need to expand that. We need the farming example is another great one. Farmers are small business people, right? I identified a project and worked to make sure that small business people, our farmers, could get started and grow. I also am the national board chair of something called Patriot Boot Camp. Patriot Boot Camp is an effort to help veterans and active duty service members who are about to leave the military to be able to start their own small businesses. What myself and some of the other founders found was that the Department of Defense, when people are about to leave the military, they basically give them a class, our service members a class on how to write a resume. And we said, well, how about trying to train them and how to, give them some information about how they can actually start their own business? In that regard, so we started this not-for-profit to help do exactly that. Now, it shouldn't have to be a not-for-profit. That should be the policy of the United States, is that we help our service members and our veterans start their own companies. And I can go on for 20 minutes about how we can do that by changing the GI Bill, et cetera. But it's those kinds of job-creating policies that we need to have in place. And quite frankly, we have a representative who hasn't had a clue. He's never created a job. He's never been involved in creating a job. What matters most on Long Island is making sure that we can actually be able to afford to live here. That means making sure that all our kids, whether those who are going to college or those who are not necessarily going to college, have, for instance, vocational training, be able to have jobs in the future. And we also need to have the housing we need so people can afford to live here. I mean, kids are growing up in a different way than we ever did in the past, even when I was growing up here. My daughter Meg is 4, and about a year ago, we were driving home from a church event or something, and I was in the front seat and she was in the back, and just the two of us in the car. And I was a little lost because we were at someone's house, and I wasn't exactly sure how to get home. And she saw me looking at the street signs, and I hear this little voice from the back saying, "Daddy, what are you doing?" And I said, "Honey, I'm just trying to figure out how to get home." And she says to me, she said, "Well, why don't you ask your phone?" Well, that's a good point. So not only was she right, but it also occurred to me that she's never going to know a world where you can't ask your phone for information, right? And what a different world that is that our kids are going to be taking the jobs in and being educated in. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on making sure they have the skills they need for the jobs of the future, and we also need to make sure that the jobs of the future are created here on Long Island. Because we're competing against the rest of the world in ways we never have in the past. But I don't think we ever won't again. Globalization is here. We're going to be competing. We need to make sure our kids are ready for that fight.
Let me ask you a question now from our colleagues up in Riverhead that I'd like to just very briefly get an answer from each of you. Lee Zeldin has pushed legislation to block the sale of Plum Island to the highest bidder. What do you envision for the future of Plum Island? And if you want to go first on this one.
I'm hoping that it is going to be preserved, returned to nature sanctuary, and be part of our nature and the ability for people to go visit it and create a nice spot to trail walk and watch wildlife and bird life, and that it become part of what attracts people to this area.
Should federal funds be used for that if necessary to do that?
Well, I think the federal government has a big part in what has gone on there, and yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it should be made into a national wildlife preserve, national wildlife refuge. And bottom line is that the whole idea 10 years ago, when they decided to sell Plum Island, was that it was going to fund this new laboratory that they built in Kansas. Now, the town of Southold, working with the Planning Commission of Suffolk County when I was the chair, we adopted the zoning that actually made it so they couldn't put a resort on Plum Island. And Donald Trump, as some of you may remember, actually had proposed putting a huge golf course on Palm Island. And he wanted to have condos and all that stuff. So the town of Southold adopted a zoning, or proposed, that the planning commission had approved, and the town of Southold approved, a zoning code that actually would make sure that it could not be used for any kind of development. That was a critically important step, because then even if the federal government wanted to sell it, whoever bought it from them couldn't put in, the kinds of things that we were all worried about. So that reduced the value to future buyers considerably. Then, in the future, its reduced value means that, quite frankly, what we should do is the federal government should put together the resources to take it off the market and should make it a national wildlife refuge.
Mr. Cologne, you live on the western part of the First District. Why should East End voters not be concerned about
Oh, sure. I've had the privilege of serving as chair of the Planning Commission for Suffolk County for the last 8 years, and it's been an opportunity for me to be involved with land use and understand the values, not just of Brookhaven, but all of the entire East End. I mean, I grew up here. This is home. My mom was a teacher of the Shore and Wading River School District. We kept we had a little runabout boat we kept in Jamesport and boated on the Peconic. So I've grown up on the East End and throughout this district. For me, making sure that we protect the quality of life on the East End is critically important. And that's why, we've said no to development here that we thought was too intense. You guys have had more PDDs in South, there are PDDs in other places, to be clear, but you guys have had more PDDs in Southampton than all the other towns in Suffolk County combined when I was on the Planning Commission. So my belief is that we need to protect the quality of life in the East End, and that's why the work I've done, whether it's agricultural work, whether it's protecting our environment, whether it's preserving space, open space on the East End, where we fought back against developers who wanted to develop luxury condos out in Amagansett. That's why the Democratic elected officials, the town supervisor of East Hampton has endorsed me, Larry Cantwell, as well as all the other town board members, Democratic town board members in East Hampton.